It started like any other evening. We had just finished dinner, and the usual hum of daily life settled around us. We talked about bills, the kids' schedules, the errands we'd both forgotten to run. Routine stuff. But then something changed. I asked her about a bill that needed paying, just another thing to check off the list. A simple question, one I thought wouldn't cause any friction. Her response, though, caught me off guard. There was a bite in her tone that I hadn't expected. It wasn't just a disagreement or frustration. It was something more, something sharp. "I'm not your property," she said. The words hung in the air, their weight sinking in slowly, settling in my chest like a stone. At first, I couldn't even process it. It felt like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't quite figure out where it had landed. Had I done something wrong? Had I crossed some invisible line? Or was this just her finally saying out loud what had been brewing beneath the surface for months? It was like everything I thought I knew about us, about this life we built, was suddenly questioned. Her words hit harder than I expected. "I'm not your property." The way she said it, with that exasperated edge, left me frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. I hadn't seen it coming. Sure, we'd had our disagreements before, but this felt different. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, something that cut to the core of how she saw me and, worse, how she saw us. I stood there trying to find the right words, but they all felt too small, too insignificant. What could I say to that? How could I argue with a statement that seemed so absolute? I felt a wave of confusion, my thoughts a blur of questions. Was I really treating her that way? Was I being controlling without realizing it? In that moment, I wasn't just grappling with her words, I was grappling with my own sense of self. What did it mean if she didn't see herself as accountable to me anymore? Did it mean our whole relationship was built on a misunderstanding? Was I the one who'd been wrong all along? I didn't know. I couldn't make sense of it. But one thing was clear. Something had shifted and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. As I stood there, my mind began to race. I thought about everything I'd done for her, years of working late, handling problems, putting in all the effort to make sure her life ran smoothly. I gave up so much to support her, to make sure she didn't have to worry about anything. But now I was hearing that none of it mattered. To her, all my sacrifices had been nothing but a form of control. Was she right? Had I really been that way? Had I somehow reduced our relationship to a transaction, where I did everything and she just accepted it without question? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had overstepped, that my desire to help had turned into something more, something suffocating. But then again, was I wrong to want to share the load? To make sure she was comfortable? I couldn't tell anymore. The line between care and control had blurred, and I was left wondering if I had crossed it long ago without even realizing it. The tension was unbearable, pulling me in two directions. I didn't know how to fix it. All I could do was replay that moment in my mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. Something inside me shifted. I didn't know when exactly, but I could feel it, a quiet resolve, a decision settling in my chest. If she wanted independence, I would give it to her. Completely. No more managing her life, no more stepping in to handle everything. For so long, I had carried the weight of our lives together, thinking it was just what I was supposed to do. But now, it felt like she was telling me that wasn't enough, that she didn't want to be treated like my responsibility. Fine. If that's what she wanted, then I would respect it. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel a rush to get revenge or punish her. It wasn't about that. It was about balance, about fairness. If she didn't want to be my property, then she couldn't expect me to shoulder everything. I wasn't going to carry her weight any longer. Let her handle it all like she wanted. I wouldn't be her caretaker anymore, not if that's how she saw me. The thought made me feel strangely free but also unsettled. Things would be different now. And I wasn't sure what came next. I eased into the change without announcing it. No speeches, no arguments. Just small shifts, almost invisible unless you were looking closely. When she asked if I could pay a bill that week, I kept my voice steady and said, "You can handle it." The look on her face told me she wasn't expecting that. Not from me. It felt strange at first, stepping back from things I always did without thinking. The faucet leaked in the kitchen, but I didn't reach for my tools. Her car needed gas, but I didn't take the keys like I normally would. Each tiny task became a quiet test of my resolve, a way to see if I could truly pull back after years of doing everything by instinct. She seemed confused, maybe a little irritated, but she didn't say anything yet. And I didn't offer explanations. I just stayed calm, letting the silence between us stretch a little longer each time. These weren't grand acts of rebellion. They were deliberate absences, tiny gaps where I used to step in without question. With every task I left untouched, I felt myself pulling back emotionally too. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was a slow drift, like stepping away from a shoreline I'd stood on for years. And I could feel the tension building in the space I left behind. The next day I started small. When she asked if I'd pay the bill, I simply told her, "You can handle it." She looked at me puzzled but said nothing more. It was a small act, almost insignificant to anyone else, but to me it felt monumental. It was my first step in drawing a line. I wasn't going to do everything anymore, not out of obligation, but because I didn't have to. I noticed more opportunities to pull away. When the faucet in the kitchen started leaking, I didn't grab my toolbox. When her car needed gas, I didn't take it to the station. Each time she looked at me with a confused expression, maybe even annoyance, but she didn't push back. Not yet. It was clear she was starting to sense that something was off, but I didn't offer any explanation. I stayed calm, letting her figure it out. The shift in our dynamic was slow, but it was real. She could see it in my actions, but I wasn't about to explain myself. I wasn't angry. I was just different. As the days went on, I kept my distance, letting the silence between us stretch. She called me during her lunch break, reminding me about the car insurance payment, something I usually took care of without question. This time I didn't hesitate. "You can pay it. The details are in the folder." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, her confusion palpable. "Why are you acting like this?" she asked. I kept my tone even, calm. "I'm not acting like anything. I'm just letting you handle things. You're perfectly capable." She didn't respond right away. I could hear the disbelief in her silence, but I didn't feel the need to explain. She had drawn the line the night before, and now it was my turn to step back. No more covering for her, no more stepping in when she expected me to. Her frustration was growing, but I wasn't going to give in. I stayed passive, letting the tension build. If she wanted to take full responsibility for her life, then she would have to handle the consequences of that choice alone. By the end of the week, the tension between us was unbearable. She could feel it too. That evening, she broke the silence, her frustration finally boiling over. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I leaned back in my chair, looking at her calmly. I had already made up my mind. "You said you're not my property, right?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "Yeah, I said that." "Well," I replied evenly, "if you're not my property, then you're not my responsibility either." Her mouth opened as if she was about to argue, but no words came out. She stood there for a moment, processing what I'd said, before walking out of the room. The bedroom door closed with a quiet click, but it felt heavier than it ever had before. I didn't feel satisfaction, not like I thought I would. There was no sense of victory in my words. But I also didn't feel guilty. The shift had happened, and it was irreversible. As the days passed, I began to realize the full weight of what I had done. My attempt to give her independence, my way of stepping back, had turned into something else entirely. It wasn't just about fairness or balance anymore. It had become a quiet war between us, a standoff neither of us could win. I thought I was making a point, but now it felt like we had reached a critical juncture. The tension had grown so thick, so suffocating, that it seemed impossible to move past it. She was still frustrated, still confused, but neither of us was willing to make the first move. I had enforced my own boundaries, but in doing so, I had pushed her so far away that I wasn't sure if we could ever come back from it. We were stuck. No solutions, no way forward. Just the quiet, painful realization that we had reached an impasse, one that might be impossible to undo. It wasn't an instant fix, but something began to shift. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, surrounded by papers, bills, receipts, and account statements. She looked up, and for a brief moment we just stared at each other. No words were spoken, but there was something unspoken in the air. She motioned to the chair across from her. "Can we go through these together?" she asked quietly. It wasn't an apology, but it was a step, a small, hesitant one. I sat down and we began sorting through the mess we had both ignored for too long. The silence between us wasn't heavy with resentment anymore. It was just necessary. I answered her questions about due dates and payments without judgment. It felt like we were finally working together, not because we had to, but because we both knew it had to be done. From there, things started to change slowly but surely. She took more initiative, calling utility companies, scheduling appointments, and even cooking dinner without waiting for me to step in. I found myself stepping back into roles I had abandoned, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to help. We weren't back to how things used to be, and we both knew that. But we were learning to share the load, to respect each other's space and boundaries. It wasn't perfect and it didn't fix everything, but it was progress. We were finding a new rhythm, a new balance, even if it meant redefining what our relationship looked like. And for the first time in weeks, the tension started to ease, replaced with a quiet understanding that we could move forward, together but not the same as before.